Having talked about the security of mobile devices, it's time to discuss the security of personal devices that are no longer mobile. The discussion is about personal computers, laptops, and so on, which still outperform mobile devices in terms of their capabilities and performance, but the latter are actively catching up. Therefore, in terms of many protective features, these two classes of devices are very similar to each other, and the recommendations I provided earlier will also apply to regular personal computers. Moreover, on personal computers, we install an operating system that needs to be updated, we install browsers for safe surfing, the recommendations for which I have already provided, we install email clients, the security recommendations for which I have also given, and we install various applications that, in terms of their protective capabilities, are not much different from those used on smartphones. Therefore, we can use the same recommendations, but I would certainly add a few additional tips to what I mentioned earlier. Firstly, remember that any external device you connect to your personal computer through any port, which is usually USB, but there could potentially be other interfaces still in use on personal computers or laptops, such as or even other types of connections, can be a source of infection for your computer and may contain malware. When I say any, I mean not just USB flash drives or other similar devices. Because, yes, a USB is an obvious tool through which attackers can infect your personal computer with various types of malware, including ransomware, trojans, viruses, worms, and similar types of malware. No, not only that. In fact, depending on how interesting you are to fraudsters, they may manage to provide you with a wireless keyboard or a wired keyboard, such as one where potentially malicious malware could be embedded in the cable that connects the keyboard to your computer, and harmful effects could ensue. It can potentially intercept data and transmit it via wireless channels to external attackers or through the internet over your unsecured home network. This channel can also be used to transmit intercepted information. Such examples are known. It could be an adapter of some kind, which may also contain some form of malware. Yes, the probability of this is low, it must be acknowledged. However, it is important to remember that today, something malicious can be embedded in any device, any cable, or any adapter that connects to your computer. It all depends on how interesting you are to scammers, but at the very least, remember that you should not insert a USB that you found before entering your house or your flat in the parking lot into your computer, because fraudsters often take advantage of this by leaving USBs that are loaded with malware, which is not detected by antivirus programs and allows them to take control of your device and hand that control over to cybercriminals. Therefore, trust but verify applies absolutely to any device that you connect to a personal computer. Also, please note that even if you are at home, make it a rule to enable screen locking after a certain timeout. I am not saying that in your apartment, whether you live alone or with someone, there are enemies or those who want to uncover your secrets. Most likely, there are none. It is simply a habit that, once formed, will allow you to protect your work computers from potential criminals in the future, as well as your personal computers, laptops, smartphones, and tablets when you are in crowded places. For instance, in an internet cafe, when you leave to place an order and leave your unlocked computer. In a hotel, in a business center, at an airport, at a train station, and so on. In other words, if you do not have the habit of locking your device, even leaving it unattended for a few seconds, this could be exploited by malicious individuals at some point. Therefore, this simple recommendation to set a timeout of 3 to 5 minutes, after which the screen will lock, is a very good piece of advice that will create a secure environment around you. Similarly, it is advised to disable the guest account on your personal computer. This is usually characteristic of personal computers, which can be used by different users. On the iOS or Android operating system, there is usually only one user account, and that is you. There is essentially no provision for using different accounts, but that is because it is hard to imagine a scenario where the same smartphone is used by different users. From the perspective of a laptop or personal computer, such scenarios are quite possible. That is why the ability to switch user accounts is built into operating systems such as Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and others. By default, when you set up your computer, you have two such accounts. This is the administrator account and the guest account. I recommend disabling the guest account, blocking it so that no guest can connect to you without entering a login and password using a keyboard or connecting remotely. Through network connections, we have already discussed network security in one of the previous sections, and I also strongly recommend not to use the built-in administrator account because if any attacker manages to take control of it, they will gain unlimited rights and privileges on your computer. Therefore, I recommend that you create an account specifically for yourself and log into the computer under that account. For this account, accordingly, disable all unnecessary privileges and powers that provide unrestricted control over your personal computers or laptop. This is good advice that will significantly protect your resources from potential cybercriminals and fraudsters. And there's one more story that needs to be discussed, which concerns personal computers, laptops, mobile devices, and many other topics we've talked about, and that is backup. Imagine that, unfortunately, for some reason your data has been encrypted by ransomware from malware that has infected your computer, smartphone, smart TV, or another location, and has encrypted all your data. Either your data was destroyed by malware or by coffee accidentally spilled on the keyboard, which caused your computer to smoke and all the data on it to be lost. What should you do if this was the only copy of your data, your photographs from years or decades, including those of your loved ones, or perhaps you are a photographer who stored all the results of your work on your laptop, for which you were paid? It could also be a music collection. February of the 19th century, perhaps it is something else that holds value for you, and you have lost it. How will you recover this data? The only way to do this is indeed simply by backing up. Depending on the device you are using, whether it is Mac OS, Windows, Android, or iOS, you will have different ways of backing up. Simpler or more complex, automatically adjustable or requiring activation on command. This will depend on the platform you are using as your computing device. For example, on the macOS or iOS platform, this is set up once, activated literally in a few clicks, after which the devices automatically start making backups on a schedule or at a specified frequency. The main thing is where this backup is made, and here it is very important that you should choose different storage locations for these backups. If you are backing up your smartphone, make sure to save it not only on your laptop but also, possibly, in the cloud, meaning you should create two backups. If this is a backup of your laptop, then store the backup not only on an external hard drive but also, possibly, in the cloud. If this is a cloud backup, then store it on an external hard drive. The main thing is to have at least one, preferably two different backups, so that in the event of losing or encrypting one backup, you will always have a second backup remaining. And remember, it is always important to regularly and consistently perform backups, because the longer the interval between backups, the harder it will be for you to recover the data you lose since the last backup. Ensure data safety. That is why, by default, many modern operating systems, whether macOS, iOS, or sometimes Windows, create a backup every hour. Yes, it is not complete, it is an incremental backup, which means that a backup is made not of the entire hard drive or the whole device, but only of the changes that have occurred in the last hour. This is a very small amount of information. It does not burden the computer, nor does it overload the communication channels. If you store this data externally, for example in the cloud, or on external storage, or on an external hard drive, it doesn't matter how you have arranged this setup, but it allows you to quickly regain access to your data in case of any unfortunate situation. And you won't have to mourn or shed bitter tears in the event of losing access to the data you have collected over the years, or perhaps even decades, depending on your age. Pay attention to this, and regularly check that the backups you make are functional and recoverable. If you are using a hard drive, check that the files on it are readable. If you are using a USB, make sure that it is readable, because they have a tendency to fail, especially if they are low-quality Chinese products or generic brands. Ultimately, it is better to choose something more reliable for backups. Yes, it may be more expensive, but there is a greater guarantee that this data can be preserved for years and its integrity will not be compromised. And there is another topic related to backups, namely backup codes. When we talked about multi-factor authentication, any decent multi-factor authentication service always offers you so-called backup codes, for example, during the setup process. If you happen to forget to save them, I recommend reconfiguring the multi-factor authentication system so that these codes are generated again, and you can save them. Store them in a secure place, which in this case can be either a printed piece of paper, an encrypted file on the hard drive, or on a USB. But somewhere separate from the device you will be using to access the service that employs multi-factor authentication. Because if, for some reason, this multi-factor authentication service stops functioning, backup codes will help you regain access to the various services you used, whether it be social networks, internet banking, email, gaming services, and so on, and prevent you from losing the data, correspondence, and information that was processed in these services. Therefore, pay attention to these backup codes. You may never use them in your life, but you should store them in a reliable place that you can remember. Otherwise, you may permanently lose access to the services that were tied to multi-factor authentication. In other words, multi-factor authentication is a must-have solution in the realm of your personal cybersecurity, meaning it is essential to use, but it must also be implemented wisely.